I'm David Atchoarena. I'm the director of the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, which is based in Hamburg in Germany.
Can we talk about the global challenges for lifelong learning as we're seeing today?
Yeah, that's indeed, we are at a very interesting time. And first of all, there is a global awareness and recognition of the importance of lifelong learning, which is at the top of the agenda, at least in many parts of the world. And this benefits also from the framework that was adopted in 2015 with the Sustainable Development Agenda, and in particular the SDG 4 on education, which actually conceptualized education within the framework of lifelong learning. At the same time, we are seeing a number of challenges to implement that agenda in reality. Countries are at the moment facing a number of competitive, I would say, constraints and demands in other areas. We've had with the COVID-19 a global pandemic, which has, to a large extent, driven the attention away from the broad lifelong learning agenda to really focus, for instance, specifically on schools and how to actually, ensure the continuity of learning when schools were closed sometimes for almost two years. We have other issues now in certain parts of the world with the crisis in Europe, rising prices of energy resulting in inflation. So the discussion about really maintaining standard of living for people, for workers, is at the top of the agenda. Climate change also, we have COP27 coming up. So in that in that context, it has been really a challenge. It is still a challenge to ensure that the commitments, the intentions, the vision that was articulated in 2015 and kind of reassessed in a number of occasions recently, including in the very recent Transformation Education Summit in New York last September, to ensure that those commitments are actually translated in terms of policies, in terms of resources at the international level.
I think it's really interesting that we've seen from different speakers today the pressures are different locally and also nationally. It depends where you are and what your sort of current situation is. I thought you said some really interesting points around intergenerational learning, which you covered quite extensively.
Yes, indeed. In fact, although the vision of lifelong learning is shared to a large extent by most countries, at the same time, its interpretation and implementation varies a lot according to specific conditions. In many countries, and certainly in this part of the world, aging, and the transition to aging societies constitute a very important structural factor that also, calls for revising the understanding of education and priorities in the field of education, with increasing attention being placed on older adult learners and senior citizens. What is interesting is that this, change also brought new opportunities to reflect on the intergenerational learning. So it's not only about how to ensure that older adults continue to have access to learning for work, in the situations where also people have to remain longer in the active population, but also for life. I mean, there is a longer life now after work, thanks to the longer life expectancy. But it's also about how the transmission of experience and knowledge from the older generation, is actually shared with the younger ones, and also how the younger ones do also, support learning of the most senior members of a community. And of course, we've had, for instance, in relation to digitalization, a very common, debate, but also practices is how digital learning can be actually, benefit from the experience of the younger generations to ensure that older people become also fully digitally literate. So this, this sharing and this vision of intergenerational learning is very important, and it is also very important at work. We're having discussion just now in the summit about workplace learning. But in labor markets, which are also aging, it's important that all the expertise, the knowledge accumulated by older workers is actually also transmitted to younger generations, and how some sort of mentoring, coaching can be organized also with the more senior workers at the workplace. So the models for for workplace learning have to take into account also this age dimension.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think what was also in your session you covered in particular was around um, individual entitlement and also social contract. I didn't know if you wanted to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, there is, this concept of the social contract, the new social contract for education, is at the center of the report of the International Commission on the Futures of Education, which was released last year. And that was an initiative by UNESCO to gather experts from around the world to have this exploration of the future and what it means for education. And that came out with this resulted in this concept of the need for a new social contract for education, with that holistic vision of learning being not only taking place in the school system, but more broadly also involving other institutions, but also other processes, in particular informal learning. So, how to ensure that in a world and in societies where learning needs to take place throughout life, how to ensure that individuals have the opportunities, the motivation, the resources to engage in that learning, and what are the new responsibilities for the state, for employers, for individuals themselves to make that process happen. I mean, so that's those are the elements to redefine this social contract for education, which relates also to a debate and a reflection about the concept of education also as a basic human right. And we have this international framework with normative instruments defining the right to education. This is now being challenged in a way, or by this requirement for learning throughout life. So it's not only about a right to education; it becomes a right to lifelong learning. So as a new human right, and this should actually call for also new mechanisms for making this right a reality, and in particular the development of entitlements for individuals, so that they can have access to learning throughout life, depending on their conditions, depending also on their own preferences and choices. So we have here in Singapore, for instance, this skills credit that has been introduced as part of Skills for Future, and this is indeed one of the manifestation of this individual entitlement, the mechanisms where each individual have actually access to a certain level of education when they think it's necessary throughout their life. So there are different I would say, mechanisms in different parts of the world. I mean, still the majority of countries do not have that in place. So there is it's a movement which is emerging to ensure that this new right is actually made possible through specific measures, mechanisms, so that people do have access to knowledge and resources are available to make that right a reality.
And we had the senior minister from Singapore give a really interesting address and looking really at productivity, well-being, looking as well at mid-career, middle-aged sort of workers, as well as blue and white collar workers. And I thought it was interesting, sort of covered what you was covering in your session as well around well-being and productivity. I don't know if you wanted to just cover any of that at all, really.
Yeah, I think it was interesting indeed to hear from him what are the categories which are identified here in Singapore as the, I would say, vulnerable groups. So groups that really need to be targeted. So to fully, ensure that they are fully included in the economy, but also in society, and that they can benefit from really participating in lifelong learning, so that they can have also opportunities for upward mobility at work and in society more broadly. So this discussion about well-being is important because traditionally, the debate on continuing education is very much limited to education at work, or at least education for work. So in other words, the mechanisms in most countries through which employers funding is actually available for individuals to continue training is limited to programs which are directly related to the job. So they are often, list of accredited programs which are endorsed by employers and which corresponds to their immediate needs in terms of upskilling and reskilling. What is interesting, at the moment is that we see that this is I would say, a narrow perspective and kind of short-term, approach to productivity and to skill needs. And increasingly, we see from research findings that the productivity of individuals is also, or I should say, maybe is first linked also to their general well-being. And indeed, the most, I would say, progressive companies are now allowing their workers also to choose from a much wider menu of learning opportunities, to embark in programs which may not be directly related to the current job positions, but really would actually relate to their immediate needs and preferences. So this kind of enlarged vision of workplace, or at least learning at work, in relation to a perspective of improvement of the well-being of the workers, is very much in line also with this vision of lifelong learning, where it's not only about, I would say, economic performance, but it's also, about ensuring a better society and a better environment also at the workplace.